So we're at the Musical Museum up in London. Korg have a brand new gallery of an exhibition here. It's a permanent exhibition showcasing all of the good things they've created over the years. We had a chat with Luke, who's basically taken us through a potted history of all the influential synths and drum machines and such that have been created by Korg over the years.
So Korg was founded in 1962 in Tokyo, and one of our first products, in fact the very first product, was the Doncamatic drum machine, which was a big washing machine sized drum machine, originally designed to go with Hammond organs or accordion players to replace a drummer, and it had all of these presets on it, and it even had a little keyboard on it, which is really cool, so you could trigger the drum sounds you wanted. We're trying to source one because they're incredibly rare, especially to find a working one these days. So, but yeah, we're working hard to try and get that as our first piece of our jigsaw. This was our first commercially produced synthesizer. This was the original, and fairly recently we've reissued it as well, as you can see here on the top. So this was the synthesizer originally designed to be sat on top of an organ. So that's why all the controls are underneath the keys, so easy access. And in our early synthesizers, our filter was called a traveller, and this has one of those on it, and you can just use it to sweep through the frequencies. But it had two different knobs on it, and one was a low pass and one was a high pass, and then you could fix them together to go through the frequencies that way, or separate them to create kind of a bandpass filter type of effect, which was quite cool. So yeah, that was quite a momentous instrument for us, just because it was the first synthesizer that we made, and famously used by Human League on some of their early records. Moving on a little bit later into the decade, 1978 saw the MS-20 and also the MS-10. So the MS-10 had one oscillator, the MS-20 had two, and it was a semi-modular synth, so it was all pre-patched or normaled behind the scenes, so you could use it perfectly well, but you'd also got this amazing patch bay where you could then reroute some of those signals, and crucially had an external signal processor, so a lot of people were using it as an effects processor, basically, using that in those incredible filters. Again, two filters, a low pass and a high pass, and even today it's very, very difficult to hear any other synthesizer that sounds like an MS-20, because those filters just have an iconic sound to them. That's the MS-20 Mini you see beside it, so that's our reissued version. Also around that time we had the the VC10, sorry, which is a vocoder as well, part of that family. At this point, it was, yeah, kind of the early dawn of synthesis, I suppose, so people who are into synths. But later on, we had some massive artists using it, like Daft Punk used it on one of their albums famously, and that track, Flat Beat by Mr. Wazzo, it was used on that as well. So it's been used, and it's still being used with the reissue, and of course our software versions as well. So yeah, this came out actually the year before the MS-20, believe it or not. And this was just, well, it's one of the most coveted synthesizers, I think, of all time by any brand, let alone Korg, mainly because it was fully polyphonic. And that era, people were just used to a monophonic synth, or maybe duophonic if you're lucky. This is 48 notes of polyphony, so full polyphony, with 3 oscillators as well. So it's a very, very special synthesizer, and this is the reissue version, which we're hoping to make available towards the end of this year or next year. And it's a full reissue, but we've incorporated elements of the 3100 and the 3200 in it as well. So for instance, the 3300 originally didn't have patch memories, so we've added that. We've added MIDI and USB as well. But it's a very, very faithful recreation. And we've managed to shrink the size of it as well due to modern circuitry, so it's not quite so deep as the Beast was originally. So many people have used it over the years. Aphex Twin, more kind of modern user of it. He's got 3 of them, I think, so he's a big fan. So the CX3 is different to what we've been talking about, because obviously it's not a synthesizer, it's an organ. And the reason this came about was basically around that time, obviously a lot of people were playing Hammond organs with a massive Leslie speaker. Not the easiest thing to gig with, so Korg came up with this idea of making a modern version of that with built-in rotary effects, all in a portable form, with full draw bars still and everything. And that was successful at the time because it provided a solution for those people who couldn't or didn't want to gig with a massive Hammond organ. There was also a dual manual version of this called the BX3 as well, so if people wanted to have that authentic dual manual experience. We did our reissue of the MS-20, the mini version, and the original founder of ARP, David Friend, he approached us and wanted to work in partnership with us, basically to resurrect the ARP brand, which had disappeared in the 80s. So we said, yeah, we'll give it a go. And we produced the ARP Odyssey. And the ARP Odyssey was a very popular synth from 1973 when it was originally launched. There were different revisions of it. This is the Rev 3. This is the full-size version. That's the mini version, which we reissued. And notable artists on this, well, Herbie Hancock used it a lot. He used it on that track Chameleon for the bass line. And it was also used by the BBC Radiophonic Workshop for the Doctor Who theme, for the lead line. So, yeah, it was used on lots of different recordings. So that was our first product for ARP. But then we expanded and we decided to reissue the ARP 2600, which is, again...
Probably because everyone wanted you to do it.
Yeah, that's right. Everyone said, yeah, that's fine. We like the Odyssey and everything, but please do the 2600. It was one of the biggest requests we've ever had for making a product. So eventually we did it. So the 2600, famously used for a few different things. It was used in Star Wars. So Ben Burt used it for the voice of R2-D2. It was also used for the sound of the Ark in Raiders of the Lost Ark when it opens. That was the ARP 2600, which is quite nice. It was also used in so many different musical productions, probably most famously on Michael Jackson's Thriller album. All the bass lines were from the ARP 2600. So it has pretty good heritage. And it's a fabulous instrument. This is our reissue of it again. And it's a 3-oscillator synth. And it's duophonic, and it just sounds incredible with a built-in spring reverb as well, which is really nice. And we've also got the mini version of that, which we've reissued. So, and all we did with the modern one, really, again, it's completely authentic, fully analog. We just added some more modern connections, so like MIDI and USB. Yeah, that one's actually signed by Dina Perlman, who is the daughter of Alan Perlman, one of the original founders. And yeah, that one's been signed by her. So 1981 saw the launch of these two units, actually. First of all, the Monopoly, which was a 4-note poly analog synthesizer, as you can see, with lots of controls on it. And this was cool because it had this round robin style of playing the 4 oscillators. You could either just layer them up and play your 4 notes, but you could also put it into a mode where it will toggle between the 4 different oscillators, which was quite a cool way of getting some unique sounds and just some natural variation as well. And then we also had the Polysix, of course, in that same year, so it's quite a momentous year for Korg. This one was 6-note poly, and what made this cool was it had, first of all, it had this nice chorus effect built in, and it had an arpeggiator, which was the early kind of makings of these arpeggiators around that period. So that meant obviously you could do kind of sequence stuff just by holding down notes, which was pretty cool, and it had patch memories as well, which was really handy. So the Monopoly and the Polysix were really the two of the last instruments with all of these analog controls on and lots of hands-on control. As you can see, as we get into the sort of mid-80s, you're starting to see synths like this with hardly any controls and digital readouts. They just look so 80s, so mid-80s as well. And also around that period, we had the invention of the protocol called MIDI. So this meant that instruments could basically talk to each other very easily then. And this was a collaboration between all of the top brands, which was, thinking about it now, I don't know if it could even happen, but back then they all got together, Korg, Yamaha, Roland, Sequential, all the big guys, and locked themselves in a room. And then a NAMM show in 1983, they came out with this incredible invention called MIDI, which meant that everything could interface with each other. It was all completely standardized, and also with computers as well, which opened the door to sequencing and quantizing and all the things we know today. And of course, MIDI still lives on now in all of our DAWs and digital instruments. So that was quite a groundbreaking thing. And then later on in the 80s, we released the M1. So the M1 was an iconic instrument because it was one of the first what we call workstations. So that meant that musicians were no longer kind of bound by the fact they just had the keyboard and then they needed other devices to record and sequence and layer. They could now do it all in one unit. So it had program mode, which was single sounds and fully editable sounds. You had combination mode where you could stack up to 8 sounds. And at that time, that was pretty momentous. And you had an 8-track sequencer in there as well, so you could record, and effects. So you could literally record a whole song in one unit. And that went on to become the best-selling synthesizer of all time. So some of the sounds which were really popular in the M1, of course, the piano. So you still hear that in dance music today. People are still after that clean, synthesized piano sound from the M1. Doesn't sound like a real piano, but that's kind of the point because it cuts through your mix like nothing else. Also, the organ was very popular. The choir sound was used a lot as well. And of course, that opening sound called Universe was just, again, at the time, in music stores and in studios, people were just playing that and like blown away by the quality of the sound. So some notable artists that use the M1, I mean, there's probably thousands, but some of the records that it's most famously appeared on are, first of all, Queen's Innuendo album. It's literally all over that album. I'm Going Slightly Mad is the choir sound. Show Must Go On, the string sound, and some of the other songs as well. Madonna's Vogue, it's got M1 piano all over that, and that's just 2 examples. So the Wavestation launched in 1990, and this was a bit of a kind of departure from the type of way we were making sounds, primarily because we'd had Dave Smith join us from Sequential around this time, and he'd developed a type of technology called vector synthesis using this wheel, and also a joystick, I should say, and also wave sequencing, which was a way to produce sequential samples played in a kind of stepped way, or you could crossfade them and create these fabulous motion-like pads as well. And that's what the Wavestation was really famous for. And it was famously used on quite a few records, and also, I'm not sure how many people know this, but it was actually used for the Apple Mac startup sound, which is still used today. Yeah, so the Prophecy and the Trinity both launched at the same time. This is the Trinity Pro, which is the slightly longer version. But the Prophecy was, again, a different type of synthesis. It was physical modeling. So this is what made this interesting. And it was using actually the same synthesis that was used in the original Wave Drum, which was in the previous year, which uses still digital technology, but actually modeling components and sounds rather than using samples. So you can get great flexibility in your sound design and also take it in completely different directions than you would do just with a sample-based synth. So that's what the Prophecy was all about. Plus it had this interesting log controller with a ribbon built in. So lots of manipulation live, although it was only a mono synth. There was a Z1, which came a couple of years later, which was basically a polyphonic version of the Prophecy as well. And then in that same year, you had the Trinity. So this was very much the progression from the M1 from the late 80s, still a workstation, but everything beefed up. A touch screen, which was a first for us on a workstation, and loads more sounds, sample memory, the ability to stack more sounds, a 16-track sequencer, and an audio recorder as well. So really taking that workstation ethos from the M1 and expanding it massively. That led on to the Triton, which is very much a Trinity in a different, slightly different format, but basically, you know, taking that technology and expanding it even more. So extra sample memory, more sounds, and also more models. So there was a 61, as you see here, there was a 73 version, and there was also an 88 weighted as well in the Triton as well. There was a Triton Studio which had a CD drive. Oh. So that was quite special again at the time, because it was literally then a studio in a box, because you could make your track from scratch and then burn a CD, and you're taking the process from start to finish. And this became the industry standard on many stages around the world. 1999 actually was a massive year for Korg, because we had the Triton, we had the Electribes, and we had the Kaoss Pad. So the Electribes were groove boxes, and the idea of those was there were 3 originally, and they all had their own different flavour. So there's drums and synth, and they were basically groove boxes that you could connect together, very much in a similar vein to our modern day Volcas, really. And people just went mad for them, basically. And that then created a whole genre for us. And through the ages, we had the MX1, the ASX1, the sample version, and then the modern day equivalents here. Completely new controller. Back at that time, there weren't any touch screens or anything doing this. So this was the first time that people were able to manipulate sound by touch, so they could really feel their way through the sound using the pad controller, whether that be effects or a filter or just levels. And DJs loved it because it made it easy for them to transition between different tracks and also be creative in production as well. So the MS-2000 came out in the year 2000, and it was an analog modeling synth. Very popular synth for us because it was kind of going back to those loads of hands-on control of an analog synth, but it was still modeled synth, but very, very accurately modeled. And that technology then found its way into our microKorg, which came out 2 years later and still going strong. And it just recently overtaken the M1 as the best-selling synthesizer of all time, which we're very proud of. So why that was so successful and still is, basically because it has that amazing sound engine in it. So it has a massive sound for a small synth, and it has the gooseneck mic for the vocoder as well. And just incredibly easy to use, great presets, and makes it easy to dive in and change your sound. So we've recently updated the microKorg to the microKorg 2. So what we've done here is we've kept the ethos of the genre select knob and the presets. We've expanded the amount of presets and put them into these three genres of classic, modern and future, as well as having loads of user sounds which you can save, which was one of the shortcomings of the original. You had to overwrite the presets to save your own sounds, which is a really nice addition. And we've kept the 5 real-time controllers, and you've got this really neat screen now, which is color-coded to match these as well as expanding the effects section as well. These are Monotrons. So there was the original Monotron, and then this is the duo and the delay. And this was, so I hear, I wasn't actually at Korg at the time, but so I hear the legend goes, these are almost like an experiment to see whether there was any thirst still for analog technology. And there definitely was, because we sold a lot of them. So the original Monotron was literally just a little monophonic synth with a rhythm controller, and but it sounded great, obviously, because it was analog. But the other killer feature was it had an audio input, so you could send any audio source through those analog filters to get an analog synth, essentially, for like £30 or whatever it was at the time. So it was incredible value, did really well. Then we made these other two models, the duo, which is duophonic, and then a delay, which had delay effects in it as well. And that really spawned the whole kind of analog explosion which happened from then, from our Volkers to the miniLog to the ProLog to the reissue of all of these things you've been seeing around the room, like the MS-20, the ARP Odyssey, the Mini 700, and now the PS3300.